Okay, mga kawawmat, in this video, we will prove theorems on right triangles. So, this will focus on HA, LA, and LL congruence theorem and HL postulates. So, in this video, we will apply deductive skills to show congruence between right triangles, the theorem, and the postulate for right triangles. So, dito, magfo-focus po tayo sa HA, LL, LA congruence theorem and HL congruence postulate to prove that the two triangles are congruent. So, ano ba muna itong parts ng triangle, itong H, A, L, 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 A, and HL? So, ano ba itong H, A, at L? So, punta muna tayo, i-discuss natin kung ano ba itong H. H stands for the hypotenuse, and A stands for your acute angle. So, this is only applicable for right triangles. So this is your H stands for the hypotenuse and your A stands for the acute angle. Next, for LL, we have two legs here. So your first leg and then your second leg. And then for your LA, L stands for the leg and acute angle. By the way, your acute angle ay hindi po palaging nandito. So, pwede rin po yan dito. So, as long as meron kang isang L, your leg, and A, so pwede rin po siya dito. Okay? And also your leg, pwede rin po dito. And then your HL, H stands for the hypotenuse, and L stands for your leg. Now, so these are the parts of the right triangle. So, we have the hypotenuse and acute angle, two legs, leg and acute angle, the hypotenuse, and the leg. So, ano ba itong mga right triangle congruence theorem? So, iisa-isahin po natin yan dito. So, when we say right triangle congruence theorem, of course, you must have two triangles. Okay? So, para maipakita natin that these two triangles are congruent by HA, LL, and LA congruence theorem and also the HL congruence postulate, we must identify the corresponding congruent parts of these two triangles. So, kailangan ma-identify natin yung corresponding congruent parts ng ng dalawang triangles na to. So, ano ba yung corresponding congruent parts? Ito po yan. So, yung hypotenuse, acute angle, leg and acute angle, leg and leg, hypotenuse and leg. So, identify natin. So, I have here triangle ACB is congruent to triangle OST. So, what is your hypotenuse? Your hypotenuse is segment AB is congruent to segment OT. That is your hypotenuse. And then for your acute angle, we have angle A is congruent to angle B. That is your angle. So, these two triangles are congruent by HA congruence theorem. Since we have identified the two congruent, corresponding congruent parts of these right triangles. And then for LL congruence theorem, so let's say I have triangle ACB is congruent to triangle OST. So let us identify the parts of these two triangles, right triangles. So we have side AC is congruent to side OS. This is your first leg. Side CB is congruent to side ST. This is your second leg. That's why these two triangles are congruent by LL congruence theorem. Next, we have triangle ACB is congruent to triangle OST. So we have to identify the LA, the leg, and the acute angle. So your leg here is side AC is congruent to side OS, that is your leg. For your acute angle, we have angle A is congruent to angle O. This is your acute angle. So these two triangles are congruent by LA congruence theorem. And next, we have triangle ACB is congruent to triangle OST. So what are the parts of these two triangles to make them congruent? So we have H, the hypotenuse. AB is congruent to segment OT. So this is your hypotenuse. And then we have CB is congruent to segment ST. So this is your leg. So that's why these two triangles are also congruent by HL congruence postulate. So let's try. State the postulate or theorem that illustrates triangle ACO is congruent to triangle JLG in each case below. So I have here number 1, angle C and angle L are right triangles. So ibig sabihin, kung right triangles po siya, we only need two parts. So ano po yung two parts na yan? It's either the hypotenuse and the leg or the angle, or the hypotenuse and the leg. So kapag meron po tayong right angles, we only need two parts, corresponding parts, na dapat congruent. So we have AO. Segment AO is congruent to JG. So ayan po, lagyan natin ng mark. And then I have here angle A is congruent to angle J. So we have here the hypotenuse and the angle. So this is by HA theorem. Next, so again, these two angles are right angles. So we have angle O is congruent to angle G, and then segment OC is congruent to segment GL. So as you can see, we have the acute angle and the leg. So this is LA theorem. Another, we have AC is congruent to segment JL, and then angle O is congruent to angle G. So we have the leg and the angle. So this is LA theorem. And then next, we have AC is congruent to segment JL, and then segment CO is congruent to segment LG. So these two sides are these two triangles are considered LL theorem. So by the way, you must have two markings here. Okay? So dapat dalawa ang markings niyan. Ayan po. Next, we have given segment OC, so this one is perpendicular to segment AC. So these two sides of a triangle is perpendicular. So ano pong ibig sabihin nun? Ito rin po, perpendicular siya dito. So ibig sabihin, kapag perpendicular, it forms right angles. Okay? So we have here AO, segment AO is congruent to segment JG, and CO is congruent to segment LG. So as you can see, we have the hypotenuse and the leg. So this is HL postulate. Next, identify which of the following congruent methods are postulate and which are theorems. So nabanggit na natin o na-discuss natin sa mga previous tutorial, ano ba ang theorems at ano ba ang postulate. So let's have this one. Number 1 is theorem. Number 2 is postulate. 3 is postulate. Number 4 is postulate. Number 5, we have theorem. HL is a postulate, LA is theorem, and LL is theorem. Now, ano nga ba ang difference nitong SAS, ASA, SSS, and AAS, congruence, postulate, and theorem, sa HA, LL, LA, and HL congruence theorem and postulate? So ano ba ang difference nitong triangle congruence postulates and theorems na nauna nating diniscuss at itong i-discuss natin ngayon? So dito, itong mga congruence postulate and theorem na to, we need three sides. Okay? I mean, three corresponding congruent parts to prove that the triangles are congruent, or to prove that the two triangles are congruent. So dito po, itong mga to, kailangan natin ng tatlong parts, corresponding parts na congruent. Pwedeng dalawang side, isang angle, dalawang angle, isang side, and so on. Unlike here, we only need two parts. Okay? So dito, kahit two parts lang po ang ibigay, for as long as it is a right triangle, we can prove that the two triangles are congruent. So yun po yung pinagkaiba nila. So dito po, we need three parts. So this is applicable for any kinds of triangles. And then this congruence theorem and postulates ay para lang po sa mga right triangles. That's why we only need two corresponding congruent parts of the triangle because your triangle is already a right triangle. Ibig sabihin, yung right angle mo doon, that is the first part already. Okay? So, yung right angle mo po doon, sa right triangle mo, that is already your first corresponding part. Okay? So, ang kailangan na lang po natin kapag right triangle po ang ating triangle, two parts na lang po to prove that the two triangles are congruent. So, again, here we need three parts. Here we only need two parts if your triangles are right triangles. So, let us prove the LL or the leg-leg theorem. So, ano ba ito? If the legs of one right triangle are congruent to the legs of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So, pinakita ko to kanina. So, if the leg of one triangle is congruent to the legs of another triangle, so let us prove this theorem. So, given triangle JLG and triangle ABC are right triangles, also, segment AC is congruent to segment JG and LG is congruent to segment BC. Now, we will prove that these two triangles are congruent. So, let's have the proof. So, first statement is you're given, of course. So, lagay natin that triangle JLG is congruent to triangle JLG is congruent to triangle ABC. So, this is given. Next, segment EC is congruent to segment JG and segment LG is congruent to segment PC, so this is also given. For number 3, we have angle JGL and angle ACB are right angles. Why? Since based dito sa given mo, right triangles po sila. So therefore, kung right triangle sila, angle JGL and angle ACB are right angles. So, that is definition of right triangle. So, sabi ko nga, since right triangles po sila, ibig sabihin, ito po ay right angles. Next, so since right angles sila, ibig sabihin, the measure of angle JGL is equal to the measure of angle ACB, which is 90. So, kapag meron tayong right angle, automatic the measure is 90. And that is, all right angles are equal. Next, so we have angle J is congruent to angle A. So, ito po, congruent daw dito. So, ano kayang pwedeng reason natin dyan? The definition of congruent angles. So, why? Because, bakit natin nasabing definition of congruent angles? So, we have here, triangle JLG is congruent to triangle ABC. We can now prove that these two triangles are congruent by SAS congruence postulate. So, ito po, na-prove natin that the leg theorem is true by SAS congruence postulate. Next, let us prove the LA or leg angle theorem. Ito po yung if one leg and an acute angle of one triangle, right triangle, are congruent to the leg and one acute angle of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So, kapag meron tayong leg and acute angle, so let us prove. Triangle ACB and triangle XZY are right triangles. So, again, we have segment EC is congruent to segment XZ, and angle A is congruent to angle X. We will prove that these two triangles are congruent, the triangle ACB and triangle XZY. So, let us list the statements. So, first is you have triangle ACB is congruent to triangle XZY, are right triangles, that is given. And then, we also have this is also given. Now, from here, we can say that angle C and angle Z are right angles. So, angle C and angle Z are right angles. So that is by definition of right triangles. Kasi nga po, sabi dito, right triangle sila. So ibig sabihin, kung right triangle, this angle and this one are right angles. Okay? And then, angle C is congruent to angle Z. So we have all right angles are congruent. So we can now prove that triangle ACB is congruent to triangle XZY. And that is by ASA congruence postulate. So na-prove natin, given lang itong leg and acute angle, that these two triangles are congruent by ASA congruence postulate. So we have angle, side, and angle. Next, let us prove the hypotenuse-angle theorem. So, HA theorem. So, ito naman po yung if the hypotenuse, ito yung hypotenuse, and the acute angle of one right triangle are congruent to the hypotenuse and corresponding acute angle of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So, given naman dito yung hypotenuse and yung acute angle natin. So, i-prove natin ito. I have here triangle PQR and triangle DEF are right triangles. So that is our given. Also, we have segment PR is congruent to segment DF and angle R is congruent to angle F. So yun po yung ating given. So we will prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle DEF. So based dito sa given natin na hypotenuse and acute angle, ipoprove natin siya. So we have, of course, your given, and then another given. Now, from here, we have angle Q and angle E are right angles. Why? Kasi based dito sa given natin, these two triangles are right triangles. So, therefore, these two are right angles. So, that is definition of right triangles. Next, so since right triangle sila, right angle sila, so angle Q and angle E are congruent. Kasi pag sinabi naman nating right angle, automatic 90 ang measure niyan. Okay? So therefore, congruent ngayon si angle E and angle Q. So that is, all right angles are congruent. Wala namang right angle na siya ay 90 degrees, tapos yung isa 85 degrees. So, lagi namang pag sinabi nating right angle, automatic congruent sila. Kasi based dito, right angle siya, so therefore, they are congruent. So, all right angles are congruent. So, we can now prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle DEF by, so kung titingnan natin, meron tayong meron tayong A angle, meron tayong isa pang angle, and then we have the S. Your S here is non-included. So, we can prove that these two triangles are congruent by AAS congruence theorem. So, we have proved that HA or the hypotenuse-angle theorem, we have proved this triangle are congruent by AAS congruence theorem. Next, let's have an example. I have here HL or hypotenuse-leg postulate. So, ito naman yung if the hypotenuse, so ito yung hypotenuse, if the hypotenuse and leg of one right triangle is congruent to the hypotenuse and corresponding leg of another right triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So, asan ba yung leg dito? Okay, so hypotenuse lang ang given natin. So, let's start. So, triangle PMO is an isosceles triangle. So, again, triangle PMO is an isosceles triangle. MJ is perpendicular to segment PO at J. So, pag sinabi natin perpendicular, ibig sabihin, it will form right angles. Okay? So, we will prove that triangle PMJ is congruent to triangle OMJ. So, let us start. So, your first statement is triangle PMO is an isosceles triangle. So, this is your given. Next is, based dito sa given natin that your triangle PMO is isosceles. So, pag sinabi kasi nating isosceles, two sides of a triangle are congruent. Okay, so that's why we have this symbol. So therefore, since isosceles nga po siya, we can say that segment PM is congruent to segment OM. And that is by definition of isosceles triangle. So, pag sinabi kasi nating isosceles triangle, two sides are congruent. And then next, we have MJ is perpendicular to segment PO at J. So, this is given. Now, kapag perpendicular po yan, ibig sabihin, magfo-form yan ng right angle. So, yun yung pwede mong gamitin na next statement mo. So, we have angle PJM and angle OJM are right angles. Why? Kasi nga po, perpendicular. Based dito sa given, ito daw po ay perpendicular dito. So, ibig sabihin, magfo-form siya ng dalawang right angles dyan. So, ang reason mo dito, definition of perpendicular lines. Since sabi nga po, perpendicular sila. Now, so if these two angles form right angles, therefore, triangle PMJ and triangle OMJ are right triangles. Okay? So, nag-base lang tayo. Actually, yung statement natin, sunod-sunod lang yan. Nakukuha mo yung next statement mo based dun sa mga previous statements. So, triangle PMJ and OMJ are right triangles. Why? Kasi nga po, based dito, meron kang nabuong right angles. So, ibig sabihin, yung two triangles mo are right triangles. So, we have definition of right triangles. So, pwede lang kasi nating sabihin na right triangle siya kapag meron siyang right angle. Next. So, we have MJ, segment MJ is congruent to segment MJ. Now, bakit ko to nilagay sa statement? Kasi po, based dito sa ating figure, nagsha-share po sila ng common side. So, we can say that segment MJ is congruent to segment MJ. So, that is by reflexive property of congruence. So, lagyan po natin ng mark. And then next, we can prove now that triangle PMJ is congruent to triangle OMJ by, so tingnan nyo po yung figure ninyo, meron tayong hypotenuse, meron tayong leg, so this is leg. So these two triangles are congruent by HL congruence postulate. Let's try. So I have here, segment BD is the perpendicular bisector of segment AC. So we will prove that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. Now, based dito sa given natin, we have here perpendicular bisector. So pag sinabi nating perpendicular bisector, aside from nagfo-form siya ng right angles, hinahati niya rin yung segment AC into two congruent segments. Okay? Pag sinabi kasi nating perpendicular lang, nagfo-form lang siya ng right angles. Pero kapag merong word na bisector, ibig sabihin, hinahati niya yung etong segment na to into two congruent segments. So, yun po ang difference ng perpendicular lang sa perpendicular bisector. So, let's have the proof. Segment BD is the perpendicular bisector of segment AC. This is given. Now, from here, since nag-form nga, they are perpendicular nga at bisector siya at the same time. So, we can say that D is the midpoint of segment AC. Why? Kasi nga po, di ba, pag sinabing bisector, hinahati niya po yung segment na to, yung AC into two congruent segments. So, ibig sabihin, kung hinati niya to into two congruent segments, ibig sabihin may midpoint ka dyan. Merong pinakagitna dyan. So, that's why we have D is the midpoint of segment AC, and that is by definition of perpendicular bisector. So, based dito sa word na bisector, because of the perpendicular bisector, magkakaroon ka ng midpoint. Okay? And then from here, since meron kang ang midpoint, ibig sabihin, these two segments are congruent. Kasi kaya nga siya tinawag na mid, siya yung pinakagitna. At ito po ay perpendicular bisector. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng midpoint kapag may perpendicular bisector. So, kung may midpoint at ito ay perpendicular bisector, ibig sabihin, these two segments are congruent. So, pwedeng yun ang gamitin mong pangatlong statement. So, we have AD is congruent to CD. So, anong reason? Definition of midpoint. So, since may midpoint ka, makaka-form siya ng two congruent segments. Next. So, we have BD. So, BD is congruent to BD since nagsishare po sila ng common side. Therefore, this side is congruent to segment BD is congruent to segment BD, and that is by reflexive property of congruence. So, lagyan po natin ng mark. Now, we can now say that angle ADB and angle CDB are right angles. Okay, so we have angle ADB and angle CDB are right angles. Why? Kasi nga po, perpendicular sila. Okay, so actually, dun yung mga statement mo, makukuha mo dun based lang sa given mo eh. Okay, so at ang reason mo, ay maiisip mo yan ng kusa dahil based doon sa given mo. So, halimbawa, angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. Bakit? Okay? So, yun ang tanong. So, maiisip mo kagad kasi perpendicular bisector. Okay? So, definition of perpendicular bisector. So, since bisector siya, magfo-form yan ng right angles. And then, we can now prove that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD by, so tignan po natin yung given natin. Meron po tayong leg and then another leg. So, we can prove that these two triangles are congruent by LL congruence theorem. So, meron tayong leg, meron tayong isang leg dito. So, LL congruence theorem. Let's have another. So, pwede kayong sumabay ng pagsagot sa akin. So, mag-try din kayo. So, sige, I'm giving you 30 seconds. If the time is not enough, you may pause the video. So, para matry nyo din, ma-check nyo kung kaya nyo nang mag-proof. Gumawa ng proof ng 2 column. So, let us start. So, meron tayo ditong 4 angles. Okay, na given. So, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, our first statement, angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. So, based dito, that is given. And then, we have triangle NME and triangle NME are right triangles. Why? So, sabi ko nga, kagaya ng mga previous example natin, pag meron kang right angle, automatic, that is a right triangle. Okay, ulitin ko. Pag meron kang right angle, automatic, we have a right triangle. So, triangle NMA and triangle NME are right angles. So, that is by definition of right triangles. And then we have MN bisect or segment MN bisects angle N. So, that is your given. Now, we have here the word bisect. So, pag sinabi nating bisect, kagaya nga ng sinabi ko, hinahati niya into 2 congruent parts. Okay? So, si MN daw, etong MN mo, binisect niya, hinati niya raw si angle N. Ito yung angle N. So, kung hinati niya si angle N, therefore, we have this. Okay? Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Ulitin ko, si MN, si side MN, binisect niya. Pag sinabi nga pong bisect, hinahati niya into 2 congruent parts. Hinati niya raw si angle N. So, ibig sabihin, kung hinati niya to si angle N, ibig sabihin, that will become your fourth statement. That angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. So, that is the definition of angle bisector. So, hindi siya perpendicular bisector ha, kasi angle po ang hinati niya. So, angle bisector. Next, we have triangle ANE is isosceles. So, kapag sinabi nating isosceles, two sides of the triangle are equal. So, that is given. So, lagyan natin ng mark. Okay, so, triangle ANE is isosceles. So, ibig sabihin, these two sides are congruent. So, yan po ay ating given. And then, we have AN, segment AN is congruent to segment EN. Segment AN is congruent to segment EN. Why? Kasi nga po, based dito sa previous statement mo that triangle ANE is isosceles. Pag sinabi kasi nating isosceles, two sides of a triangle are equal. So, ibig sabihin, segment AN is congruent to segment EN. So, this is by definition of isosceles triangle. And then now, we can now prove that right triangle NMA is congruent to right triangle NME. So, right triangle NMA is congruent to the right triangle NME by, tingnan nyo po yung given natin, we have here the hypotenuse and we have the angle. So, these two right triangles are congruent by HA congruence theorem. So, we have the hypotenuse and the acute angle. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell para updated kayo for more video tutorials. This is your guide in learning your math lessons, your Wow Math channel.